This is the Lutheran Education Podcast, a bi-weekly podcast where we explore issues, trends, and events surrounding Christian education with your hosts, Richard Schumacher, Senior Director of Operations at LSCM, and Dr. Tracy Salgado, Director of Special Education at LSCM.
And welcome to the Lutheran Education Podcast, brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries. I am your host, Richard Schumacher. I'm the Senior Director of Operations at LSCM, and we are excited to once again have a great friend of the podcast and a great friend of Lutheran education, Dr. Kim Marxhausen, joining us today. Dr. Marxhausen, Kim, welcome back.
Well, thank you, Rich, for having me. I have the best conversations on this podcast.
I enjoy them as well. It seems like we always manage to, make it very interesting, very informative, light conversation, and there's always that Michigan-Nebraska tension that fills the air as well, which I'm sure the listeners really enjoy.
Yeah, that's what they tune in for.
Yes, the fan mail that we get is always very go blue GBR after we do these podcasts. So it's great to have you back. So, for those of our listeners who perhaps aren't familiar with you and your work, or who are just wanting to see, where Dr. Markhausen is at this time of year, this time of her life, fill us in. Let us know a little bit about yourself, where you're working, what you're doing, what your path has been to get you to this point.
Well, I spent 25 years teaching in Lutheran schools and was blessed to do so. And then for some reason, God asked me to leave the perfect job. And by perfect job, I mean it was a job that included snack time.
Nice.
Yeah, you can't do better than that. But he sent me back to graduate school, and I got a PhD in educational psychology. So I wear lots of different hats now, some of them only interesting to me. But currently, I'm teaching a class on expertise and creativity for the University of Nebraska. And this might be interesting to your audience. I'm writing a query letter for a book that I'm about halfway done with. That would be to help teachers who don't have special ed experience work with children who are neurodivergent. And it's going to
Excellent.
be written for church volunteers especially.
Excellent. That is such a need. I'm excited to hear that, and definitely we'll look forward to seeing that released, and perhaps even get an autographed copy. I hope I have enough of an in with the author to be able to swing that.
We might, if you say something nice about the Cornhuskers.
Absolutely. And let's just get that out of the way right now. Nebraska came into Ann Arbor recently and shut out the Wolverines 3-0 in front of a packed house at the Chrysler Center. Uh, no ill adverse effects from the loss that the Cornhuskers took to the Michigan football team a few weeks prior to that. But both both teams are looking poised and ready, and looks like Nebraska's going to be off to another national championship season before the year's up.
Yeah, that's our hope.
All right, so before we get into the meat of what we're actually going to talk about, I'm just going to ask a question. So, the perfect job had a snack time.
Hmm.
What are your feelings on higher education instituting a snack time? And I'll preface it with this. When I was a student at Concordia Ann Arbor, I had an opportunity to do a study abroad program and spent a semester in London at Oak Hill College there. They had a affiliation with CUAA. And so I got to spend a semester over there. Every day during the week, Monday through Friday, everything on campus, all classes, all work, everything shut down every day at 10 a.m. And we all went down to the cafeteria, the meeting place, whatever it was called, and had coffee, and there were snacks available. And the
Hmm.
entire campus showed up for this 15-minute coffee break, and it was the most amazing thing ever. And I've never seen it anywhere else, so I know it's possible. What are your feelings on higher education implementing such a practice here in the States?
I definitely support that. And it was something I experienced in graduate school. because the dean every day would bring a whole big box of donuts and everybody in the building would come down. But the break from work is important, but that networking is also really important. And it's interesting that you asked this question because not too long ago I did a podcast with Pastor Tim Allman, and one of the things we talked about in there was the scriptural basis for snacking and napping because of, Jesus feeding people, feeding the fish and sleeping during a storm and whatnot. This is important things to our health.
And if the listeners would at least indulge us to get through the end of this podcast before switching over to that one, I would appreciate it. But no, that's amazing. I will be checking out that podcast when we get done, so that way I have a scriptural basis for the snacking that I like to do. My doctor won't be happy, but if Jesus wants me to have a snack, who am I
Yeah,
to,
well,
who am I to tell him no? So, Kim, you when we talked about hopping on and having a conversation, uh, I was able to just ask, what are you studying? What are you researching right now? What's interesting to you that you're wanting to share? And the the answer that you came back with was anxiety in our students. And this is a topic that I think is very relevant, very pertinent right now. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which came out last year, really sparked a lot of conversation amongst educators and amongst parents about the impact that social media and phones and all those things are having on the mental health of our kids. And it seemed like a great topic, so that's what we're going to be jumping in on here today. I want to start with a question based off of the subtitle of the book itself that reads, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. What jumps off the page at me is the phrase great rewiring of childhood, because that's a pretty bold claim. And the
mhm,
way it's phrased is one of this isn't an accident. This all has
right.
the feel of being a very intentional thing that is being perpetrated on our society, on our kids. And that's not a small claim either. So just wanted to start by getting your thoughts on that and that feeling of, is this a rewiring? And is there something intentional behind that rewiring in your estimation?
Well, it's definitely a rewiring. And it's a big concern for me as an educational psychologist because when we're born, our brains are the only body organ that we have that's not fully formed. So it has everything it needs, but an infant has like a handful of neural connections. So what we do, what we experience, and who we are with, that's what creates our brain. So yes, when television started to show up in bedrooms, early childhood children started coming to my kindergarten class with a reduced ability in language. I noticed that in the early 2000s right away. And almost every child that I was working on with language development had a parent that said, "Oh, we should take the TV out of the bedroom." So, yeah, it rewires. And so we have every reason to expect that if our young people are spending a lot of time on social media, it's going to change the way their brain works. And AI coming up is going to do that too. That's something that we talk about in this class I'm teaching that has me a little nervous, Rich, even more nervous than about Husker football.
And there's some significant costs. Oh, no, I'm not going to go there. Um, so the reasons behind it, in your estimation, I mean, I've read the book, and I know that there's some theories that Jonathan puts out there, but for me, it always comes back to a really simple phrase: follow the money.
Yeah.
There is huge money to be made on cell phones and all the various adaptations that they have now, or if I could be so bold, handheld personal computers.
Hmm.
Because let's be honest, go into a store and purchase a new phone today, ask the kid selling you the phone about the functionality of the phone, and their reaction is priceless. They have no idea what the phone can do or how well it works because they don't care.
Right.
They're working on everything else. But when it comes to that it's easy to see that cell phone companies and the developers of these platforms and all the various apps and things, they're looking to groom the next generation to continue to have this need, this use, this almost dependency upon the phone being a part of your life. Nobody leaves anywhere without their phone. We say that quite commonly. Is there more to it than just simply trying to ensure the financial success of an industry? Or is it really just come down to someone trying to make a buck?
The answer is yes. It's all together. But, I'd like to even look back at about 2009, which is when Game Boy came out. And the big difference between Game Boy and playing video games at home is that you're carrying that Game Boy with you everywhere you go. And so the background message there is your life is so boring. You need to have games with you all the time. That was almost as destructive as what we're seeing now. We just didn't notice it because it was followed very quickly with smartphones and carrying social media around. But that was the motivational hook that really made kids focus on that phone. And the sad thing is that so much of our learning is about being in fellowship with each other. That's the way God designed our brain. So we can go back to Game Boy and cell phones, carrying those computers around, as you said, and we can see how that works against what God wants us to be able to do. An infant is born recognizing the sound of its parent's voice because that one sense has been working in the womb. That tells us so much about what God's plan is for learning, that
Sure.
child's going to learn from its family. And so when we replace family and friends with something we hold in our hands, it's starting to work against God's plan. Then the second thing, and I don't know if you remember this from the book, but to me, the scariest page on the book was where he was describing the hook model.
Mhm.
And so he was taking that from a book written to people who design apps, for instance. And this is how you get people addicted to your product. And that's what it was built on. So we have to be aware of that. I look at that model and I'm seeing, oh, there's classical conditioning, there's operant conditioning. Oh my goodness. And that last piece is what really pulls us in. And I'm realizing why I'm on the phone too much when I know better.
Yeah.
It's designed to bring me in. And our children don't have that critical thinking to be able to realize that.
It's crazy. And I think you see it most in the games that we see on our phones. I've got an idea for a devotion that's been kicking around in my head for a while based on that. But if you think about years ago, you might have a game on your phone, and again, I'll go way back, Tetris. Just a time-consuming, interesting, turn the objects to whatever, and then build your wall and complete the lines. There was just a game, and it was a matter of can I get a higher score this time than I did last time? And
Right.
if you had to put the game down because you were done, no harm, no foul, because we'll just start a new game. Every game that you play online now seems to have a scoring component that have levels that once you reach a certain level, you get rewarded.
Hmm.
And you get rewarded, and it conditions your brain to, well, I have to keep playing just a little longer. I'll stop after I hit that reward. But then there is another setup that rewards you based on after every 3 or 4 hours, you can collect this reward again. So now I'm tempted every 4 hours to go back in and log into the game just to get that reward.
Right.
So that way I'm maximizing my time throughout the given course of a day. So I'll have those extra rewards so I can play the game better. They seem to have come up with ways of getting you to have 3 and 4 different rewards to bring you back that kind of line up with each other and make it all work. And that's the hook. Because I will catch myself saying I should log on because I need to get this reward for this game. And then I'll ask myself, really?
Yes.
And, wake up in the middle of the night, well, I might as well hop. No,
Yeah.
that's ridiculous. But the hook is set so hard that you have to actively tell yourself, this is really ridiculous. I shouldn't be doing this. But it's true, and it's very intentional in the design of those games to get you to do that. I'm a glasses wearer.
Hmm.
And if you ever watch me, you'll know my glasses, they're not fitted right to my face. So I'm constantly taking my finger and pushing them back up on my nose. And if anyone else is a glasses wearer, you know of what I speak. You're constantly doing that. Have you ever not had your glasses on for an extended period of time and just out of habit, put your finger up to push your glasses back up and then feel like an idiot because I'm not wearing glasses? I just hit myself in the head. All right, if I'm the only person that's doing this, I just admitted it. I'm hoping and guessing that I'm not the only person doing it. Same practice is true with people and their phones. If
Hmm.
you don't have your phone on you, how often it is you sit down someplace and you've got, well, I've got 30 seconds of downtime, and you start reaching for your phone pocket. It's again this hook, this condition that any moment of time that I have that's the slightest bit of downtime, I'm obligated to fill it. And with what? Conversation, prayer, a thought about the rest of my day or a future plan. No, phone. I can check what's going on Facebook. I can purchase something to have it shipped to the house. It's amazing the hook that they have established.
Well, and if we apply what you've been talking about to people who are in middle school and high school especially, one of the things psychologically that they're working on is finding their identity.
Hmm.
And so what they need to be able to do that is they need to be interacting with peers and with teachers and with parents and with anyone that they can. But instead, built into those games or built into the apps is this kind of false interaction.
Yeah.
So you feel like you're interacting with the world, or maybe there's a social component to your game, so you feel like you're interacting with real people, but it's not an interaction, it's just a reaction. And then that becomes something that's not satisfying to the brain because the brain is saying, I need you to interact. And so there we have that cycle that creates that anxiety. Because if our brain is not getting what it needs, it's going to tell us. I think about my son when he was a baby, he had RSV and he had a fever that was rising really fast. He had a seizure from that because the brain says the temperature's going up too fast. I'm going to create a seizure and that's going to cool me down.
Mm.
Well, the same thing happens when the brain's not getting what it needs in terms of interactions, because those interactions, the small ones when you're having donuts at a college, and the bigger ones when you're playing a game with friends, a real life game with friends, that's what is helping to build those pathways in the brain that helps you to understand who you are. But instead, we've got these young people's investing in their games, investing in social media, which is part of that hook model, and that's becoming their identity.
And it's interesting to me because as you were describing that, I'm thinking of the stories you hear from time to time about how the one in particular that came to mind uh, during the pandemic, a lot of the race car drivers began doing virtual racing. They were playing the video games.
Mhm.
And the simulations were, pretty lifelike. I mean, it got to the point where I think Fox actually were broadcasting simulated races on TV featuring NASCAR drivers because we can't get together at the track, but there was such a demand to watch anything
Sure.
that these drivers were willing to do that. And there was a story about Dale Earnhardt Jr. being in one of these simulated race things, and there was a guy in the simulation, just a random person playing the game, he connected with, and this kid showed enough ability that I think Dale hired him in some capacity to work a real job within his company. And the story was lauded and heralded, and I should have probably done my research on this, but if I'm getting it a little wrong, I'll apologize. Um, but we hear those stories and everyone says, wow, what a great thing how this technology created this opportunity. And okay, I'll give you that one, but that's one in infinitesimal number of interactions. And what's really more important to the people living on planet Earth, that once in a lifetime potential opportunity that something could happen through a technology, or the thousands upon thousands of interactions that we're having with the people in our lives every day that are actually, as you're saying, developing our minds and our characters, who we are as people, that are so necessary in our development.
Yeah. Well, here's a story that fits in with that too. Before COVID, I remember keynoting for a family ministry conference.
Mhm.
And I think I was talking about faith development, but we also talked a little bit about how you work with parents on that. And one of the things I said, this is a rule that I wish every parent could follow. Because I know from teaching, and you know this from administrating, you can't overwhelm parents with a
Right.
whole long list of things to do. So this is one thing regarding technology, is if we could train parents that when their child comes in the room, their phone goes in their pocket. And if their child is not in the room to interact with them, then it's fine to get that phone out again. But the message that you have when that phone is out, when you're asking them to wait a little bit longer, is such a dangerous message to the brain. And I explained that if you're using the phone as a tool, if you're on vacation and it's raining and you want to find the nearest McDonald's with an indoor playground, yes, do that in front of your child.
Yeah.
But if you're using it for entertainment, what is the message you're giving them? Well, what happened is a week or so later, I got an email from someone at the conference, and she said, my husband and I really took this rule to heart with our 1-year-old daughter. And in a week's time, we've noted a huge difference. And I thought, a 1-year-old? 1-year-olds, they're at telegraphic speech. They're not conversing with you. But what they were telling me was that their daughter was reaching out to interact with them more often
Hmm.
because they didn't have a phone in between them. So even starting that young, we've got to be aware of how we're wiring their brains. To go back to what you started with at the beginning of this podcast, that we have an input on how their brains are being wired, not just the companies creating the games and the apps.
Yeah. Because no parent in their right mind would ever say that they would willingly allow any outside person, let alone outside company, have that level of influence over their kids,
Right.
but we're very passively letting that happen every time we choose to ignore what the child is saying or doing, or how they're reaching out and connecting, or what they're absorbing from us when we're filtering it through the view of our phone.
Well, and there was an interesting survey result in Jonathan Haidt's book too, where they asked middle school students about how accessible their parents were, and 65% of middle school students said that their parents were distracted when they were talking to them.
Yeah.
That just shouldn't be. I mean, sometimes you're distracted as in, I'm in the bathroom now, you can wait a minute. But to be distracted on your phone, or to be giving the impression that you would rather be on your phone,
Yes.
that's what's hurting.
Yeah. And sadly, I think we can all kind of go through our own memories and, yep, guilty to a certain level on that,
Mhm.
because again, it's so enticing, it's so easy, it's so available, and
Well,
it's
and it's a big part of your life. I mean, you
yeah,
can't get rid of it.
yeah. We're talking with Dr. Kim Marxhausen, looking at the anxious generation and the impact that screens and phones have had on our society, and especially on our kids. I want to stick with that middle school age group because naively, I am of the opinion that that's about the time that most kids should be coming into having that phone with them. In my own experience with my own kids, middle school was the time period because now schedules were diverging, and
Mhm.
if they're at school and I need to work out a ride home from a practice or whatever. So that's what made sense for me. So that's kind of always been the benchmark for me. I know full well that 13 is not the magic year. It's
Yeah.
quite varied, and I would be probably upset to hear what you're going to tell me in a minute as far as what that number probably is now. But being a middle school teacher myself for many years, I understand the just the anxiety in general of going through middle school. It's not a time in life that most of us would volunteer to go back to. Where we did it once, that's not anything we want to repeat. But as we again take a look at the increase in anxiety, because we're seeing much more anxiety in society, and it does make sense that phones and technologies have a definite role in that. But as we look at that, Kim, to what extent is the phone, is that use of the phone creating a greater anxiety problem with our kids at middle school or even younger?
So the issue of community is so important at that age. And we know that because students pull away from wanting to please the teacher like they did in kindergarten, which is what I liked about kindergarten, to wanting to please each other and to be admired by each other. But the community that's online with social media has no expectations. There's just the rules are not said on there, and there's no responsiveness either. There's no one in there who's coming back in and helping you and taking care of you. The social media itself is just simply out there. But healthy communities have both expectations and responsiveness. And this was not, of course, in Jonathan's book, but Rich, we can identify this now that expectations and responsiveness, that's law and grace.
It is.
That's exactly what law and grace are. And that's what our middle school students need so much of. They need to know that there are rules and expectations, and the teachers need to realize the kids are not going to follow the rules and expectations, but there needs to be that grace in there too. And so what they see play out on social media is someone who finally crosses the line. They keep pushing the envelope, getting their behavior and their responses worse and worse. And we've seen that with politicians recently too. And then suddenly someone crosses the line and then they get canceled.
Mhm.
There's no opportunity to apologize and to be forgiven and to learn that rule. They're just simply canceled. And when you are a teenager or a teenager, you don't have the life experiences that tell you, I can get over this. So instead, it becomes a part of who you are. And you either develop shame from that, or you develop a sense of rebellion and you embrace that kind of personality or those kind of actions that are going to get you in trouble. And those two extremes are not going to produce a healthy outcome, either one of them. And so, yes, then the anxiety comes because I've been shamed on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, or I have to get even more audacious because now that's the identity that I've accepted.
And at that point, as the kids are emerging into social media, obviously their social circle at school is the primary group that they're connecting with. I'm sure, grandma and grandpa are in there
Mhm.
too on certain levels, but uh, grandma and grandpa are on Facebook, and there's a whole lot of other social media that it's not Facebook that grandma's never going to. And so that extension of being on display or on the stage that you have when you're in school, trying to impress your classmates and not be the ostracized one. So you're trying to keep up with the Joneses in such a hard way
Mhm.
there. To have that all kind of fall apart on the social media platform makes it even harder. It's one thing to do something or say something embarrassing at school. Everyone gets a laugh out of it, but by the next day or a couple of days later, it has subsided. Social media is permanent,
Right,
it's far-reaching, and uh, for a student to have something like that happen, and doesn't even have to be like really extremes in
right.
terms of behaviors in the mind of that child, that's got to be devastating. And
Mhm.
not having the development in place or the network of people to come in that know that it even happened, they're having to face this on their own with less than a full array of support and ability to be able to deal with that. And they're in many cases suffering through this in complete isolation. What a horrible place to be.
Yeah. And if you think about bullying, you know that in the last 20 years especially, there's been a lot of curricula coming out on how do we teach kids to not be a bully and how do we teach kids to speak up for themselves. Well, all of that depends on things happening synchronously. So that means at that moment when you're both there. But when it's happening, when bullying is happening in social media, it's asynchronous. So you wake up and you find out someone's done this to you, and it's already been liked or noticed by who knows everybody else that you know. And for a middle schooler, that's the whole world.
Yeah.
Now, what are you supposed to do to counteract that? We don't have a method for that.
And as adults, I think we sometimes lose sight of that because we would look at that situation in our 30, 40, 50-year-old selves, and having had the benefit of years of experience and more development, we would look at it and can dismiss it to say, it's no big deal. It'll go away. It'll be fine. But in the mind of that 12-year-old, 13-year-old girl, no,
Yeah,
it's not going to go away. It's not fine because according to where I'm at in my development, this is my, as you said, world. This is everybody I know. And they don't have that ability to really process and understand that, yeah, this probably is just a blip in the course of your entire life, but that's not their fault. That's where they are. That's their development level at that
right.
point.
And the neurological background to that is they've just recently had a major pruning in the brain. So a pruning session in the brain is when the brain says, we're going to get rid of the stuff we're not using anymore so we
Okay.
can make room for more neural pathways to do what we need to do next. Because when you get to that middle school age, your brain needs to be able to use logic. Now, if we don't typically think of middle schoolers as having good logic, and that's because they've not practiced it,
Sure.
but we hear them trying it. Well, so that lots has been a lot of stuff is gotten rid of in their brain in that pruning, and it's being rebuilt. They have to have human experiences to know that if you're bullied when you're 12 for being a nerd, that's okay because maybe you'll grow up to be a teacher. But they can't see that far into the future. And then not only that, but the bullying is just so much worse. It tends to be of a sexual nature. That's really horrifying to me. But that brings in a whole nother problem with being on the internet when you're young, is that you're not protected from that stuff.
Yeah. And critics of all this will say that the phone is being vilified because it's just a tool. I mean, you used that
Mhm.
phrase earlier when it came to we're getting rained out of our current plan, so we need to come up with a plan B. And in that case, yeah, it is a tool. But if you look into a toolbox, a hammer is a wonderful tool, but it's limited in its use.
Mhm.
Hammer's great for driving nails, really not that good for driving in a screw because you can't put in a screw with a hammer unless you're slamming it in there and you're going to create
Well,
more
you might be
damage.
able to get that screw in there, but it's going to slide back out.
Exactly. And again, same thing. I could take any tool in the toolbox, and if I'm using it for its designed use, then it's wonderful. If I'm trying to do something else with it that was never designed to be used in that way, it's useless. The issue at hand with our phones is that if we're going to say a phone is a tool, that's great, but it is the most diverse tool that we've ever seen because there's no limit to what it can do.
Right.
And as we start moving into AI and continuing to do these other things, and I'm not anti-technology, again, if it's being used in the proper perspective as the tool that it's designed to be, it's great. It's wonderful. Complete admission, I used some AI to give me some quick reference, summaries of Jonathan's book just to refresh my memory
Mhm.
as I'm going through this interview today. There's great uses for it by any stretch, but you can use a phone as a tool in so many ways, good, bad, and it can create a lot of harm as well as create a lot of benefit. And in the wrong hands at the wrong time for the wrong purposes, the negativity is going to be really bad. The screw I drove with a hammer, screw's gonna be messed up, the board's going to be destroyed, but I can easily get a new board and I can easily fix that particular problem. The problems that we're causing here with the technology have the potential for being very devastating and very long-term problems without a simple fix.
Well, here's the big difference between a phone and a hammer. The hammer doesn't wake you up in the middle of the night and say, come and use me. It
That is
doesn't,
very true. I have never
yeah.
woken up in the middle of the night saying, I've got to go drive a nail.
Even if you're a carpenter, you can take a break from using a hammer, but the phone is designed to pull you in. The other difference is you don't see a hammer or other kinds of tools as being a human-like thing. But we're talking about AI. AI responds in a very human way. And the students in my current college class, they are Gen Y. And it's interesting the way they respond to technology because at the same time that they think AI is something that's just going to be nothing but good, and their teacher is just an okay boomer when she warns them that there might be a problem. I do tell them I'll give them permission to say that phrase. They can't say it on their own. But then on the other hand, they're the ones telling me about Brick, which is this new tool that you can use that will keep you from accessing social media on your phone. So they're the teenagers talking to each other. You need to get this. Now, granted, this is an honors course. So these teenagers are a little different than some other people. They're nerds like me, but still, they recognize that. I get terrified by AI because it can mimic a human being and it can fool your brain a little bit more into thinking you are getting the interaction that you need, but you
Yes.
aren't because you're not seeing a face. You're not in a real environment. You're not embodied, is the term that's used in the book. But it fools a little bit better than social media does. And just simply building into AI technology that where the AI is not going to convince someone that suicide is a good thing, which has happened already, that's not enough. It's not enough. One of the things we're talking about in the class is the moral development of AI. Because as human beings, our moral development does not happen outside of our cognitive development. It is intertwined. And so as AI is developing cognitively, is it developing a sense of morality? But I'm not seeing it get past the stage where my kindergartners were, because kindergartners will tell you what you want to hear, and they won't think that's a lie because their level of morality is I keep the teacher happy or I keep my parent happy. That's exactly where AI is right now. It's going to tell you what you want to hear, just like the algorithms on social media will put up on your page the kind of memes you want to see. Not healthy.
A lot of things to be anxious about when it comes
Mhm.
to just that component. Any other things as far as technology is concerned that will increase the anxiety for the user, and again, whether it's a child or a teen or an adult, anything else that we see in that realm that creates or increases that level of anxiety that a person could be feeling?
One of the big problems is that phone use is what's called an experience blocker. And so it not only blocks you talking to someone else, but it blocks you interacting with the real world. And so that becomes another danger in that rewiring in the brain. But again, the brain says we need to be outside. We need to be in nature. We need to be around other people. We need to do creative things. But the phone is keeping you away from that. So it just comes back and feeds again. Your brain's not getting what it needs, and that makes you anxious. When you're anxious, you tend to go back to your phone because playing a game a little bit or scrolling through social media can help you calm down. And then that, of course, just feeds back into that circle.
Mm.
Um, we could talk a little bit about ages when kids should get phones. And you're right, it's not an easy thing to hear. I'm so glad that my kids are in their 30s and this isn't an issue for me. But a smartphone should definitely not happen until 16 or 17 years old. And that is hard to even imagine. Even I have a hard time imagining kids not having a phone. They should probably just have, a flip phone
And here
instead
I
of.
was thinking you were about to tell me that your kids were in their 30s and they still don't have
Yeah, they
still don't
still,
have a phone.
yeah, no, no, they do. And they're trying to help their parents with their phones. That's the stage we're at.
That's a good and healthy thing right there. And this is a good time to take a quick break. So we'll jump back into the conversation here with Dr. Kim Marxhausen in just a moment. But first, just a quick message from LSCM. You are listening to Lutheran Education Podcast brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries.
Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear today, please consider sharing our podcast with friends and colleagues in the industry. Again, thank you for listening to the Lutheran Education Podcast.
All right, and welcome back to the Lutheran Education Podcast brought to you by LSCM. We're continuing our conversation with Dr. Kim Marxhausen based on the Jonathan Haidt book from 2024, The Anxious Generation, but looking at the impact that technology and particularly smartphones have had on our students and on our society as a whole. Kim, as we finished up, we were talking about the age of when a child should start using a smartphone and having access to all of the many things that it can provide. And there's always going to be some variance on that, circumstances that may cause that age to go up or to go down. But one of the things that you mentioned was this whole concept of an experience blocker.
Mhm.
I'm always amazed. And again, if you've ever listened to Kim and I talk and listened to the first half of this podcast, we go back and forth with Nebraska versus Michigan. It's fun. Michigan wins most of those important games, and
In
Kim's a good sport
volleyball,
about
do
that.
they? In volleyball, Rich?
We scored a few points. We we won in the court of public opinion because all of the images from Chrysler Center show everyone in the building wearing maize and blue and no red.
Yeah, yeah.
So
There's some debate about that. That's
yeah.
that's false news right
No,
there.
no AI use there by any stretch. But no, with our common love of sports and athletics and college athletics, I'm always amazed at people can be out in nature, out at an event, out at a function, and they're living this amazing experience, holding a phone up,
Yeah,
recording it for who?
yeah.
Of all the videos that are taken of all these, who do they show them to? I guarantee you they sit on that phone until they run out of memory and they have to delete it because they don't know what else to do with it. Or if they put it up on YouTube for all four followers that actually watched it, but it doesn't matter because whatever the event is, just watch everybody in the stands or stand. There's thousands of phones. So you're even taking yourself out of the moment because
Right.
I have to capture this. To what end? I have no idea.
Yeah.
But
And if you're in my age group, there's anxiety right there on, oh, I should be filming this. Oh, how do I make this work? And then so I just don't. And then it's over. And then I think, oh, I should have gotten a video clip so I could put that up on social media. So now I've got no anxiety. And I've finally come to the conclusion that no, nobody wants to see my experiences. I should just experience them. It's like nobody wants to see what I'm eating. I'm gonna take a picture of my food.
yeah, and if you're ever like dieting or working with a trainer and he's on your Facebook message, that you don't want them to see
But yeah,
what you're
no.
eating at that point. And I know that my trainer is not listening to this podcast, so I can make that I can make that admission at this point. But experience blockers, you use that term, and I have not heard that before, but it's perfect for
Mhm.
what we're doing to ourselves when it comes to that. So tell us more about what are the other experience blockers that we're facing when it comes to our technology?
Well, and this was in Jonathan's book again, but it's also something, I mean, because he's a sociologist, and so that's what I liked about the book, because it overlaps with what I've learned in psychology, but it gave a slightly different perspective. But th this is a huge thing that I studied when I studied development too. The brain is growing and developing because of those experiences. So any kind of screen is going to block your experiences. And when I talk to teachers, especially, I say if you're going to use a screen, especially in an early childhood classroom, you need to have a really good reason for it, because every instance of using the screen is going to block an experience. And we need to take that into account. But what I like to use when I talk to parents about this, especially in terms of the parents' use of screens, not just them using it, looking at a phone, but um, constantly handing their children screens, or making sure, you can't drive in the car without a screen. You can't wait at the doctor's office without a screen. Those kind of things. Being at the grocery store, I kind of want to take screens away from children, but that is frowned upon. I found out you kind of get kicked out of the grocery store when you steal an iPad from a child. But all those experiences are important. So what I like to show parents is I have this picture, I have a photograph of a really healthy tree photoshopped up next to a less than healthy tree. Because the idea is every time that child interacts with a sibling or a parent or points to something, you have what we call is serve and return. That's the interaction that's happening between them. It's like it grows a new leaf in the child's brain. And so children who have fewer experiences then, they will grow leaves in their brain, but they don't grow as many. And you can see in the photograph, both halves of the trees are green, but yet you know in your heart which one's the healthy one, which tree is the one that's going to survive a drought, for instance, which tree is the one that's going to survive a big storm and not lose any branches. And that's what we want to create in the brains of our children. That's what makes them resilient, and that's what helps them to overcome anxiety. But they have to have those experiences. So some of those experiences are interactions with family members, but a lot of those experiences are things like trial and error, trying to build something and it fails. And that's just a little blip in your life. What have you learned there? Well, you've learned something else about building, but you've also learned that there's other approaches. And so if something I tried didn't work, I can try again. We just had this here at my house. My husband, who's recently retired, fancies himself a plumber. And most of the time he does well with that. But we've spent a week with him. He's replaced the faucets in one of our bathrooms, trying to solve the problem of dripping water underneath the sink. And if you have a set of experiences where problems have been overcome, you're going to be a lot less anxious about that.
Very
It's
true.
just a drip under the sink. It's not water flowing. I'm not going to worry about it. We're going to figure it out. But when kids have those experience blocked, they don't build up that experience library that they need. Same thing is true with bullying. Kindergartners thought anytime a student said something they didn't like, they were being bullied. That was their definition.
Yeah.
So if you paint a picture and someone says, "Oh, I don't like that color," they're bullying me. Well, no. I had to, as a teacher, give them lots of experiences to figure out. Sometimes we have to let our friends be wrong, but they're still our friends, aren't they? You don't learn that from watching a video. You learn that from experiences.
And that's such a rich concept there too, because that idea of a kindergartner thinking that something should be a different color. Now, okay, if we're painting or coloring a picture of a pine tree, and one student is coloring that pine tree and they're coloring it orange, no, pine trees aren't orange.
Mhm,
That just not doesn't happen in nature. Now, if the student wants to make their pine tree orange, that's a choice,
mhm.
but that student would have to then also accept the fact that other kids may, point out to them, pine trees are green. That's part of that development. Then the child can make the decision to say, you're right, and I'm just going to make mine green because that's what it should be, or you're right, but I'm going to keep mine orange because I like it orange. That's part of that development. That's part of that concept. Then you fast forward that into adulthood when we struggle with, well, this particular person views the world from this sort of a view
Mhm.
that might be more liberal or conservative than mine. We can look at that and say, well, that person has a different worldview when it comes to that particular topic. Or as many fancy nowadays, we can say, well, that person's a terrible person and should be completely removed from society. Again, it goes from something that's very simple,
Yeah.
but if that is not something that's learned along the way, then it makes sense when you would apply the same approach or the same process in later life on things that are more complex. 'Cause if you didn't learn it before, what's gonna make you all of a sudden learn it when you're again 30, 40, 50, 60 years old?
And it speaks to the ideas about creativity too, because if we want to go back to a kindergartner painting a painting of a tree, well, if you're an artist, it's not unusual that you're going to paint that tree in about 5 or 6 different colors
Right.
just to be able to see how it looks in the environment where you're painting it, how it looks with the other colors in there. How are you ever going to be creative if your experiences with the color of trees are just from what you've seen on a screen? You need to have that real life experience. You need to have someone say, "Oh, I've never seen an orange tree before," to say, "Hey, that's something different. Maybe I could do orange trees and purple dogs." And, I mean, then you've moved into the area of creativity.
Yeah. And again, if you look at art over the course of centuries, some artists and some artistic movements were very much based on realism. It's got to look like a photo image
Mhm.
of whatever landscape that I just saw. And then there's some others that this is really up to someone's interpretation because they often say you can't see the forest through the trees. Well, I can't see a forest or trees because what you've got here isn't, but you're telling me it is. So there's lots of different ways to be able to view that, and it's not to say that one artistic era or period is wrong. It's just that's what that artist chose to create out of their own creative license, and that's how they choose to view it. And it's okay. They're comfortable with that, and I'm comfortable with them saying that. Uh, Taping a banana to the wall, maybe that's a little too much, uh, but again, to each their own when it comes to that. Let me ask you this question, Kim. Virtual reality is something that has come into education in certain ways, and I've seen lots of folks talk about the benefits that come from that. I can't afford to take my kids to the Louvre, so here's a website and an opportunity where I can virtually go to the Louvre and see the images and whatnot's there, and a million other different things for that. Where does that fall into this? Because again, some might say, well, that's not an experience blocker. That's an opportunity to have an experience.
Mhm.
How do you see the use of VR when it comes to educational purposes? Good, bad, indifferent.
Well, again, we have a tool there, and that's a wonderful tool, and that's a good example of the kind of thinking I like teachers to do. So I look at this virtual experience at the Louvre, feeling confident that if we go to the Louvre that way, no one's going to steal the royal jewels from the third floor, like just recently happened. I can give them that fantastic experience of seeing these paintings that we're talking about. So if you've balanced that, and you are also in your art teaching doing a lot of real experiences, then that's going to be a plus added on. It becomes a problem if that's the only way you
Yeah.
experience art. And if you're taking up so much time in healthier kind of embodied experiences, because if you actually go to an art gallery, you're seeing the art in a different way because you're up closer to it. You are experiencing other people around you and their experience with that piece of art. And that's true of any kind of virtual reality experience. You're taking away the embodied part of it, and that will have an impact on the brain. Whether or not it's going to be positive or negative, I don't know that we can say at this point. But I do know that children, and we are children, I teach college freshmen and they all think they're adults. Uh, but I know from studying development that our brains aren't done developing until definitely until our late 20s and maybe even our early 30s. And so we do need to be conscious of that because once you get past 35, it's all downhill. Fine. You want to waste your time with a screen? That's fine, because your brain's moving into a different stage of development. But we need to pay attention to this now. Screens teach our brains different things than real life experiences do.
Yeah, and even then, I mean, it's not going to impact our development, but by the time we're 35, many of us are now spouses and parents.
Hmm.
It's definitely going to impact those relationships if, again, you walk into the room and I can't get a hello because I'm in the middle of reading an article or playing a game or talking to uh, Sven, who is my euchre partner from Sweden that I have never met, but you know, all those different things can still have that impact on the relationships that we have. So there's never even that time where you can simply say that, well, it's not hurting anybody. Eh, if you're connected and in tune with other people in your presence, then letting them see that you've made that choice where the technology supersedes the present day, that will have an impact.
And so much of what we're talking about is discernment too.
Sure.
And as parents and teachers, we need to show students how to and children how to be discerning. And a big way that we do that is in how we orchestrate the day. So if I'm a parent and I've purchased for my children a virtual reality headset, well, that's fine. But I also want to pair that with real experiences and teach my child, okay, we're not going to spend 6 hours a day this summer playing with the VR set. We're going to also do some other things in the day. And however the parent wants to, whether you're doing it with the child or whether you're setting that up as a schedule, that's teaching them that we keep this contained to a certain extent,
Mhm.
and then make sure we do the healthy things too.
Yeah, because again, you may not ever be able to get to the Louvre because I mean, flying to France has some costs, obviously, but every big city has a museum. Every, universities have access to the arts and those sorts of things. So while you may not be able to go to, the Louvre, the Tate, the Met, those big ones, you can still, use that. Hey, this is a museum that's in Paris, but hey, let's drive up to the museum here in town and kind of see what they have and get that
Right.
same impression. And you're right, I think it does make a big impact. Anyone listening who has ever been to the Grand Canyon, for example, this is a great example that I have from my own personal life because we've all seen pictures of the Grand Canyon and
Mhm.
it's impressive. Once you've gone to the Grand Canyon one time and you've seen it yourself, no picture can
Right.
possibly match what you're standing there looking at. And yep, you're going to sit there and take hundreds of pictures throughout the course of the day or days that you're there because you just can't help yourself because it's so amazing. But to show anybody a picture from the Grand Canyon will do no justice to what it is to be there and experience it in real life to say, wow, what an amazing thing that God has created here.
Right. And even if you had like a drone version, and you're really kind of experiencing flying over it, it's not the same
No.
as you're standing there because your interoception is a big part of what you're seeing. And so that kind of tickly feeling you feel in the back of your knees that says, don't lean over too far,
Yep.
that's part of the experience of being at the Grand Canyon too.
Yeah, so much more to actually living the life and the creation that God has given us, as opposed to zipping through the electronic Cliffs Notes version that so much happens in our technology. All right, we're going to finish this up in a second segment. So for those of you who are enjoying the conversation, you've got something to look forward to because we're not done. We're going to continue the conversation in our next episode. But in the meantime, Kim, if anyone wants to reach out and connect with you, have more conversation about this, or ask some questions specific to their own circumstances, how would they be able to get in touch with you to do that?
Well, the easiest way is to go to my website, which is kim.marxhausen.net. And on there, then you can email me at kim@marxhausen.net. So, and I love having those kind of conversations. So I would encourage people to go ahead and contact me.
And if you listen to the podcast, we'll put up a flyer for all of our podcasts on LSEM's social media pages. We'll make sure to have the website printed there as well, in case you're not sure how to spell Marxhausen. We'll have an accurate depiction of that for you there. So ironic that I'm telling you to check our social media to get that information, but
I know.
it's a tool. It's a tool.
tool.
It's leading you to an experience. Kim, thank you so very much for taking the time. We'll look forward to continuing the conversation in our next episode.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the Lutheran Education Podcast. Again, if you like what you're hearing, please share the links with others. Follow us on whatever platform you're getting your social media or your podcasts at. And just reach out. Let us know what you thought was good and what else you'd like us to be able to provide you. But thank you for listening. And you've been listening to the Lutheran Education Podcast. And we're brought to you by Lutheran Special Education Ministries.
Thank you for listening. We'll meet you again in 2 weeks for the Lutheran Education Podcast. For more information about LSEM, go to our website at luthsped.org. You can follow us on X by going to www.x.com/LSEM1873 or on Facebook at facebook.com/LSEM1873. If you're on Instagram, you can find us by going to @LSEM1873. We'll meet you again in 2 weeks for the Lutheran Education Podcast. Did you enjoy today's podcast? Want to help get the word out? Please leave us a review on the app you're using to listen today.